Why Disney's remakes feel like a betrayal. Snow White's latest reimagining sparks heated debate. For centuries, the tale of Snow White has been one of the most cherished and widely recognized fairy tales in Western culture. Its most famous version comes from the Brothers Grimm in 1812, where Snow White's defining characteristics, skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood and hair as black as ebony, play a vital role in the story. This physical description is more than just aesthetic, it is deeply symbolic of her purity, beauty, and the jealousy of her wicked stepmother. These elements have defined the character for generations, particularly through Disney's iconic 1937 animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In the original Grimm brothers' tale, the Queen's desire for a child with this striking appearance was central to the story's foundation. The Queen, pricking her finger by a window in winter, saw the red of her blood against the white snow and wished for a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. This image is the essence of Snow White's identity, her very name is born from it. Other versions of the Snow White tale. While the Grimm brothers version is the most famous, Snow White has been told in various forms throughout Europe long before and after the Grimm's publication. These versions differ in important details, but none have reached the same level of popularity and cultural influence as the Grimm's version. However, they offer an interesting look at how different cultures interpreted the tale, and how the character's identity has evolved. Italian version La Fanciulla dei Sette Fratelli, The Maiden and the Seven Robbers, collected by Giambattista Basili in 1634, has some similar themes to Snow White. In this version, a young woman is persecuted by a wicked queen and finds refuge with a group of robbers. While it shares some motifs with Snow White, it lacks the powerful imagery of the skin as white as snow, and is not as closely aligned with the version that became famous. Russian version. In The Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights by Alexander Pushkin, 1833. The focus is again on beauty and persecution, but the heroine's physical traits are not as central to her identity as in the Grimm brothers' tale. This story, while beloved in Russia, never gained the same global recognition. Spanish version Blanca Flor, meaning white flower, is a lesser-known Spanish version of Snow White. In this tale, the protagonist, Blanca Flor, is similarly beautiful and persecuted by an envious queen, but the emphasis is more on her name, which symbolizes her purity rather than her physical traits being central to the plot. The Spanish version, Blanca Flor, serves as a key example of how Disney could have approached their reimagining if they wanted to modernize the character's racial or cultural identity without fundamentally changing the core of Snow White. If Disney wanted to tell a story that diverged from the iconic pale skin of Snow White, they could have drawn inspiration from Blanca Flor instead. This tale already exists within the European fairy tale canon, and could have provided a foundation for a new, diverse character with her own distinct narrative and cultural roots. Rather than altering the original Snow White, they could have created a story around Blanca Flor, whose name and symbolism could accommodate the changes without sacrificing the integrity of the Snow White tradition. The controversy with Disney's live-action Snow White. Fast forward to the present, and Disney's upcoming live-action Snow White remake has ignited significant backlash. This controversy isn't merely about casting Rachel Zegler, a Latina actress, in the role, it's about fundamentally altering the character's defining traits. Snow White's pale skin is not a minor detail, it's integral to the character's identity and the story itself. By casting an actress who does not possess these physical traits, Disney is making a deliberate break from the original story's roots, distancing itself from the symbolic purity and innocence that her appearance represented. For many fans, this decision feels like yet another instance of Disney altering beloved stories to align with what some see as a woke agenda. The frustration doesn't stem from opposition to diversity, but from the feeling that these changes are being made to push a specific political narrative rather than preserve the integrity of these timeless tales. It's as though Disney has begun using its platform to promote a certain ideology, transforming classic stories into vehicles for woke propaganda. This issue extends beyond Snow White. Parents who have been waiting for a live-action remake of this classic fairy tale may feel caught off guard, just as they did with the Lightyear controversy. What was expected to be a simple family film suddenly included a same-sex kiss, leaving parents unprepared for questions from their children about content they weren't expecting. This feels like a betrayal of the trust that many families have placed in Disney for generations. The concern is not about diversity or inclusion in themselves, it's about the loss of the integrity of these stories. It's about Disney taking liberties with characters and narratives that have endured for centuries, often stripping them of their core values to push a modern political or social message. When Snow White's name and appearance are changed, it feels like the heart of the story has been replaced. This isn't just a case of modernizing, it's a fundamental shift in the character's identity, and it's not an isolated case. What's next? Other potential bastardizations of beloved Disney classics. This pattern raises the question, what other beloved Disney stories might be next to undergo such changes? Pinocchio could be reimagined as a boy made of nanites instead of wood, with Jiminy Cricket replaced by a talking smartphone app. The timeless lesson of becoming real by learning what it means to be human could be lost in favor of a modern, tech-centric twist. The Lion King might be revised to show Simba as a champion of veganism, rejecting the natural circle of life in favor of promoting animal rights, turning the movie into a morality play about environmentalism rather than a coming-of-age story about destiny and responsibility. Mulan could become a pacifist who refuses to fight, leading a non-violent movement instead of joining the army to protect her family, changing the original story of courage and sacrifice into one about rejecting conflict at all costs. Cinderella might reject the idea of romance entirely, choosing a life of independence and empowerment instead of finding love, completely altering the core message of hope and human connection. Aladdin could focus on environmental activism, with the genie's wishes being used to combat climate change instead of personal growth, love, or adventure, replacing the film's traditional themes with a political message. These hypothetical examples illustrate the potential for even more drastic changes to beloved stories under the guise of progress and modernization. While representation and inclusivity are important, many feel that these reimaginings come at the cost of the timeless values that made those stories special in the first place. It's not about resisting diversity, it's about preserving the integrity of stories that have been passed down through generations. The bigger picture, why this feels like a betrayal. This trend is deeply concerning for many parents who have trusted Disney for decades. They've come to expect family-friendly films with enduring messages about courage, love, and morality. But what they are now seeing are films that seem to be deliberately pushing a woke agenda under the guise of modernizing these classics. This leaves parents feeling blindsided, with little preparation to explain these changes to their children. The analogy of Julius Caesar's betrayal by Mark Antony is apt. Disney, once trusted implicitly by families, is now seen by many as repeatedly betraying that trust. Parents feel ambushed when they bring their children to a film expecting the familiar magic and are instead confronted with messages or themes they did not anticipate. It's not just one film, it's a pattern, and with each new release it feels like another stab in the back from a company they once held dear. The warning. Parents and fans need to stay vigilant. Disney, a company once synonymous with family-friendly entertainment, now seems to be using its platform to reshape classic stories into vehicles for modern political and social messages. Whether it's the changes to Snow White, unexpected content in Lightyear, or potential future reimaginings of Pinocchio, The Lion King, or Mulan, this trend is undeniable. What was once a trusted source of joy and moral lessons may now present content that conflicts with the values and expectations many parents hold dear. Before taking your children to see remakes of these classic films, it's important to do your research. Don't assume that because you grew up with these stories that your children will be seeing the same thing. If this trend continues, future generations may never experience the timeless lessons of these tales, but instead, see them replaced with a series of politically or ideologically driven narratives. In the end, this isn't about opposing progress or inclusion, it's about protecting the stories we love from being fundamentally rewritten, losing the qualities that made them resonate across generations. If we're not careful, we risk losing these timeless tales altogether, traded for something that looks familiar on the surface but, underneath, is an entirely different story.